Today, we're going to start going over chapter 16, part A, which is start of the endocrine system. During these chapters, we're going to learn about different type of the hormones and how we're going to have controlling of these hormones inside our body. And we're going to be able to name the organs which they are part of our endocrine system, and they're going to release their secretion in our blood system, and how they're going to control the activity of the organs or organ system inside our body. If we want to go over endocrine system, the first thing that we need to know is going to be the type of glands which we consider them as an endocrine system. We have pineal glands, pituitary glands, parathyroid glands, thyroid glands, pancreas, adrenal glands, and our basically ovaries or testes, which they are part of our endocrine system. When we say endocrine system again, that means those organs are produce a specific type of the hormones and chemicals, and they're going to release them in our blood system. Endocrine system is work with our nervous system directly. Then we're going to have sympathetic or parasympathetic activity or autonomic nervous system, which they're going to control the activity or functioning of these hormones, and they work together. Around 30 type of hormones we have inside our body, and some of them are act with second messengers, some of them are directly bind to receptors, and we're going to go over those in details during these chapters. Endocrinology is the type of the biology study which they're going to focus over the hormones and endocrine organs. If we want to go over the nervous system and endocrine system, remember the nervous system is going to work through the communication by neurons. The endocrine system is going to work through the release of the hormones in our blood system, and our blood system is going to distribute the hormones to the rest of the body. The function of our nervous system is going to be short because they are communicate very fast to each other, and then basically we don't require too much of the time to see those communication. But when we talk about endocrine system, because the hormones are going to release to the blood is going to be distributed to the organs, it's going to take more time compared to the neural communication. And when we talk about nervous system are going to bind to a specific area. They are located in a specific location. But when we talk about endocrine system, they are having broader location. They're going to work anywhere that blood can reach those areas. Other things that we're going to have is acting over the long distance versus the short distance. Our neurons are going to use neurotransmitter for communication. And basically, they're going to affect on the shorter distance. Hormones are going to use blood vessels. Then basically, they're going to affect on the longer distance compared to the nervous system. If we want to go over endocrine system is going to control a bunch of activity that we're going to have inside our body, like reproduction. We're going to have the regulation of the temperature inside our body, iron balance or water absorption, or even we can have the growth and development of the cells and tissues. And we're going to have release of different type of the defense or immune subunits. All these can be controlled by endocrine system. Now we're going to go over a little bit difference between the type of the hormones that we're going to have, type of glands which they're going to secrete, and the differences between the type of the hormones. When it comes to the glands, we have two types of glands. Basically, when it comes to the secretion mode, we can have exocrine and we can have endocrine. The exocrines, basically, they're going to have a ducts, and the secretion is going to be released through the ducts, to the surface of the tissue or to the surface of the organ system, such as when we're going to have sweat glands, which they are located in our skin, and they have ducts, and they're going to release their secretion to the surface of the skin. Saliva, which is going to be released inside our mouth. But remember, the endocrine one is going to release those hormones inside our blood system. Then we don't require to have the ducts. Then basically they are ductless. Endocrine glands, such as pituitary, thyroid, parathyroid, adrenal glands, all those are going to affect on different type of the secretion. They can affect on the endocrine one, and also they can affect on the exocrine one. Let's get started with some examples that we have in this slide. Pancreas. Pancreas is an organ which is going to release the insulin inside our blood system. And that is going to involve in control of blood sugar and considered as a part of digestive system. We have gonads. We're going to have ovaries in females and testes in male, which they're going to produce hormones, sexual hormones, such as estrogen, progesterone in female, or testosterone, androgen in male. And those are basically another part of the secretion that we're going to have. Also, we can have placenta. Placenta is before the birth, when women are pregnant, they're going to transfer different type of hormones, enzymes, foods to the fetus by using the placenta. Then going over all those, they can affect on various organs. They can affect on, for example, intestine. They can affect on the kidneys. They can affect on the heart functioning, or sometimes they can affect on the cells, like fat cells. Then this is going to be the target cells, which they're going to receive those hormones, and they're going to provide a specific type of the response to those hormones. In this picture, you'll see the summary of the selected endocrine organs of our body, all those that we're going to basically cover during this chapter. You can see the pineal gland, hypothalamus, pituitary gland, which pituitary gland itself is going to have the anterior part and posterior part, and we're going to cover that. The thyroid, parathyroid, thymus, adrenal gland, which is going to have the cortex area and is going to have medullary part, and pancreas, and basically gonads, which is going to go over reproductive system area. Now, if we want to go over the endocrine system, remember we told you we can have long distance and we can have short distance communication. Now, if you're looking at this picture, you're going to see different type of the chemical signaling that we're going to have in endocrine system, how they're going to basically communicate with each other. We can have autocrine or autocrine, which both are correct. Then basically, we have the type of the cells which is going to release the hormones, and that hormones is going to target itself, the cell itself. But sometimes these hormones are going to transfer to the neighbor cells, and they're going to affect on the neighbor cells. We consider this type of action, if that is going to happen through the gap junctions, as the gap junction communication. And sometimes they transfer from one cell to another cell and penetrate through the plasma membrane of the neighbor cells and enter to the cells. Then in this case, we call that paracrine. And we're going to have the endocrine, which is going to be released in the blood, and blood is going to take those hormones or chemical to the target cells. Then the main difference in here is when you're going to have the autocrine, your target cells and the cells which is going to produce hormone is the same things. In the rest, you're going to have different type of the target cells. Now, you can have short communication like paracrine one, which basically the chemical is going to secrete it to the neighbor cells, or you can have long one, the autocrine one, or the endocrine one. Endocrine one is going to be much more longer, then you're going to have the blood vessels, which they're going to take them to the target cells. Now, these are type of the communication that we have. Now, if we want to go over hormones themselves and see the differences between type of the hormones, we can have two main categories. We're going to have amino acid-based hormones, and we're going to have the steroid hormones. Then going over the amino acid base, remember amino acids that we're going to have 20 type of them are building block of the proteins or glycoproteins basically. Then these type of the hormones, they're going to have amino acid in their structures. Thyroid hormones, catecholamine, which basically those are type of hormones which they're going to be released by medullary region of the adrenal glands, such as epinephrine and norepinephrine, or neurotransmitters such as the dopamine or serotonin or melatonin are these type of the hormones. But some of our hormones, they are not made of the amino acid or peptide or proteins. They are made of the cholesterol, the fat. And basically, they are highly lipophilic. That means they love the fat. They are fat soluble. These type of the hormones, we can give you some examples. Like most of the sexual hormones are considered as steroid hormones. We can have cortisol as a steroid hormones, or we're gonna have the isoniazid hormones, which they are type of the paracrine, and basically they're gonna be released to the neighbor cells, or target cells is gonna be the neighbor cells. Again, if we want to go over the target cells, your target cells are different. Sometimes we're going to have the hormones which they're going to directly penetrate through the plasma membrane because they are the lipophilic and they are nonpolar cells and they can cross or diffuse through the membrane. And sometimes they're going to bind to the receptors or they're going to bind to the second messenger, and then it's going to result in changing the shape of the receptors and let our hormones penetrate inside cytoplasm and insert their effects. Then those are kind of different. And sometimes we're going to have a stimulation of the enzymes or proteins, which they're going to affect on the target cells, such as thyroid hormone, which they can stimulate various type of the protein, which we need them for the having balance in metabolism, and any change in these enzymes are going to regulate our metabolism. Sometimes they can activate them, sometimes they can block them, which basically we consider that as a deactivation of the enzymes. Sometimes we're going to have release of these hormones in response to another stimuli, such as producing of the oxytocin and production of the milk when the newborn baby is going to basically touch the mammary glands of the mother or breast of the mother, which is going to result in positive feedback, and we can have milk production. Or we can have a stimulation of the mitosis cell division. Now, hormones, remember, they can be the fat lover or lipid soluble, or sometimes they don't like the fat. They have polar structures, then they are water soluble. The water soluble one are those amino acid based one. Except for thyroid hormones, remember this exception. These type of hormones, because they cannot cross the plasma membrane through diffusion, they're going to use the second messenger. They're going to activate G proteins, and then the changing in the shape of receptors is going to help them to have the opening of receptors, and we can have penetration of the hormones inside cells. But the lipid-soluble one, like the steroid hormones or thyroid hormones, because they are the fat lover or they have nonpolar structures, they easily diffuse through the membrane and they can goes inside cell. Now, when we talk about second messengers basically are another type of proteins or enzymes. Then we have different type of those. We can have cyclic M or we can have PIP2. And these are the type of the second messenger that we're going to use basically for activation or for signaling of the hormones. When we use the cyclic M, the hormone, which we consider that as a first messenger, is going to bind to the receptors. Receptors is going to activate another protein, which we call the G proteins or G-coupled proteins. These G proteins, when they're going to be activated, they're going to affect on the enzyme, which we call that adenylate cyclase. This enzyme can be activated or inhibited in response to the activation of the G proteins. Now, if they're going to be activated, they're going to send signals. Then adenylate, the enzyme, is going to convert our ATP, which is source of the energy for our cells, to the CM. CM, or cyclic M, is the second messenger in this case. And then the activated CM is going to affect on the next protein, which is the kinase. And that kinase is going to involve in phosphorylation. It's going to add another phosphate to the proteins and change their structures. And that is going to help the receptors to open up and we can have movement of the hormones to inside cells. That's the cyclic AMP or CAMP basically. When we're done with all those structures, the enzymes, the CAMP enzymes, is going to be degraded by another enzyme, which we call that the phosphodiesterase. Remember, ASE at the end of each word, that means this is the enzyme, and it's going to basically block the cascade. Remember, that was a cascade, that was chain of the reaction that we had in response of binding the hormones to the receptors. And that is going to control basically metabolism, the gene regulation, or the heartbeat. In this graph, you can see all those processes. You can see the hormones, which they are in the pinkish round shaped circles in here. They're going to bind to the receptors. In response to that, you can see the activation of the G proteins. And when our G proteins are going to be activated, basically, they're going to activate the enzyme, the adenylate cyclase enzyme. And look at on the adenylate cyclase enzyme. The G protein is going to act as a key, is going to bind to those like the adenylate cyclase. And you're going to have activation of the new proteins. Then you're going to start to convert the ATP to the CM, which is going to be our second messenger, basically. And that CM is going to affect on the release of the kinase. And now we can have the phosphorylation. In this step, you can have inactive protein or you can have active protein, depends on what type of the hormone we have as a first messenger. Now, another way of the signaling that we're going to have is a PIP2. The PIP2, basically, hormone is going to bind to the receptors on the cell membrane. G protein is going to be activated, but we're not going to have the adenylate enzyme. We're going to have the phospholipase, and phospholipase is going to be activated. An activated phospholipase, which we call that the PIP2, is going to split. And we're going to have basically two proteins, which we call them second messenger. One of them considered as a diacylglycerol, which we call it DAG, and another one is going to be the inositol 3-phosphate or IP3. The DAG one is going to activate the protein kinase and is going to affect on cellular response. The IP3 one is going to release the calcium ions, which they are basically stored inside cells in the endoplasmic reticulum. And the released calcium is going to activate the cascade of the secretion of other enzymes, or they can respond to the muscle contraction, or they can result in cell signalings or immune response. Then this type of the communication or hormone release basically is highly important for immune response and defense system inside our body. Another thing that we can add to this PIP2 way is going to be when we have the calcium as a second messenger. Calcium can bind to the protein, which we call that calmodulin, and those calmodulin is going to activate or amplify the cellular response in response to the hormones. The cyclic guanosine monophosphate is another type of the second messenger that we can use in response to the hormones. Then basically we're going to have guanosine, another form of the amino acid that we have, and we're going to use it as a second messenger. And insulin is going to use of the tyrosine kinase enzyme, and another type of the kinase enzyme when they are binding to the cells. And as you can see, we have various types of the second messenger. Remember, the lipid-soluble one, they're going to diffuse to the cell membrane. The membrane of the cells is made of the biphosphate lipid. Then basically they are fat lovers, and the lipophilic cells or fat lover molecules can penetrate in those areas. Then they're going to go to the inside of the cells. They can enter to the nucleus. They can initiate the DNA transcription and adjust the protein synthesis inside cells. Remember, our enzymes are made of proteins. These processes can control the protein activity, enzyme activity, and metabolic activity inside our body. Now, look at this picture. You can see the steroid hormone, they directly go through the membrane of the cell, the plasma membrane of the cells. Then they're going to penetrate through the membrane of the nucleus. And they're going to enter, they're going to bind to the DNA, and they can control the transcription of the DNA to mRNA and also direct the protein synthesis. Now, how we're going to have balance in amount of our hormones inside our body? We're going to have negative feedback and positive feedback. Negative feedback is the main part. It's going to control basically the level of the hormones that we're going to have. Imagine we have increase of the specific hormone inside our body. Then we're going to have signaling to the brain that we have this much of these specific hormones in our blood system. Our brain is going to make decision over that. It's going to send signals to the other organs, such as, for example, hypothalamus. Hypothalamus is going to send signals over pituitary gland. And in response to that, we're going to have inhibition of that specific hormones. And we consider that as a negative feedback. But sometimes you have a lower level of the hormone. You need to have a higher level of that. In this case, we're going to use of the positive feedback. Remember, negative feedback is inhibitory, and we're going to have positive feedback, which is the stimulatory. Now, we have a bunch of the chemicals or bunch of the activity which they can stimulate release of the hormones. We can have humoral stimuli. That means something related to blood. Any change in the level of ions in your blood can affect on release of the hormones. We can have neural stimuli. This part is the neuron part. For example, neurotransmitter. If we're going to have change in the balance of neurotransmitter, that can trigger the release of hormones. Imagine we're going to have change in the level of the norepinephrine or epinephrine. And also we're going to have the hormonal stimuli. That means we directly have the change in the level of the specific hormone in our blood system, which can trigger other hormones. We're going to go over these things in details. Now, look at on the picture that we have. In this picture, you see the thyroid and parathyroid glands. As you can see, the larger part is the thyroid one, and you're going to have the 4 small glands, which we consider them as a parathyroid. Now, hormone can release or trigger the calcium level in our blood system. If we're going to have lower amount of the calcium inside our blood system, our cells or our blood system is going to distinguish that. It's going to send signals to our brain. Then we're going to have release of parathyroid hormones. Parathyroid hormones is a stimulatory hormones. It's going to increase the level of the calcium concentration inside our body by different type of the activity. We can increase the calcium level to the blood system. And that is one of the humoral parts, which basically our blood system is going to be involved. Now, if you want to go over neural stimuli, remember the norepinephrine, epinephrine, which is going to be released by medullary or the mid part of adrenal glands. They are part of our neurotransmitter. They're going to affect on the nerve communication. Together, the epinephrine, norepinephrine, named as a catecholamine. Then if you're seeing the secretion of the catecholamines, basically we are referring to the epinephrine or epinephrine. And signaling is going to happen between our central nervous system and our adrenal gland. The sympathetic one is going to activate it, stimulate it. We can have release of them, or we can have parasympathetic activity, which is going to block secretion of those catecholamines. Now, the next step is going to be the hormonal. The hormone release, which is going to trigger another hormone. Now, if you're looking at this picture, you see several different structures or basically organs. You're going to see the hypothalamus, which is a structure inside our brain, and it's going to control a bunch of the activity. One of the main part is control of releasing of the hormones. Hypothalamus is going to carry different type of the hormones. And these hormones, when they're going to be released, they're going to move through the stack that we call that infundibulum to the pituitary glands. Pituitary glands is going to have 2 main parts. It's going to have the anterior and it's going to have the posterior. In this picture, we are focusing on the anterior pituitary glands. And as you can see, we're going to have release of other type of the pituitary hormones, which they're going to trigger thyroid glands, they're going to trigger adrenal glands, they're going to trigger the gonads, the ovaries or testes. And these are adjusting different type of the hormones. We're going to go over these axes, the pituitary, hypothalamic axis, and explain them basically in details for you guys. The nervous system is going to be controlled by autonomic part. Then that means you're not going to have any ability to control the release of your hormones manually. Then we're going to have the sympathetic activity, which we call that fight or flight. And that is going to stimulate secretion of those hormones inside our blood system and is going to result in several different activity. Or we can have the parasympathetic one, which basically we call that rest and digest, and it is going to block some of those activities. Now, if we want to go over the target cells in this case, it depends on which part we are talking about. For example, if we're going to have the adrenocorticotropin hormones, then receptors are going to be the adrenal gland, or that can be the thyroid glands. And the target cells is different. You can have blood as a target cells, or you can have receptors as a target cells, or you can have another hormone as a target cells. Now, what is going to be the response? You can have upregulation of the hormone, or you can have downregulation of the hormone. Upregulation, that means your target cells are going to be more activated in response to lower amount of the hormones. And when we say downregulation, basically means target cells are less activated in response to the higher level of the hormone that we have. We have enough hormone to bind to those receptors, then they're not going to be activated anymore. Now, hormones, when they circulate inside our blood system, they can freely move without binding to anything, or they can bind to other type of the proteins, or they're going to be attached and they're going to move, or those basically proteins act as a carrier and carry our hormones to the other organs. These factors also are going to be based on the concentration of the hormones. How much of that hormones we're going to have in our blood system. The speed of the activation or removal of those hormones inside our body. Basically, hormones, when we talk about endocrine one, they're going to be filtrated by our kidneys, or some of them they're going to metabolize in our liver, and sometimes we're going to have a specific enzyme which is going to convert that to the another molecules, and we absorb them. Then we have three pathways to remove those hormones from our blood system. We're going to have kidneys, we're going to have livers, and we're going to have the degradation by enzymes. If we want to go over the hormones, each hormone is going to have the half-life. Half-life is a time that we need basically to decrease the concentration of those hormones inside our blood system by half. And that is going to be different, depends on the structure of the hormones or type of the hormones. Sometimes they're going to last only for 1 minute or a few seconds. Sometimes they're going to last for months. Then depends on those types. Then, as I mentioned, some of these hormones are producing the immediate response. The steroid one is going to take hours to days, and we can have longer duration for steroid ones, and sometimes we're going to have basically very small range of the activity. Then like blood sugar. And those are basically the fast response. The water-soluble hormones, such as insulin, adrenaline, the peptide hormones, they're going to have very short half-life. Then basically, they're going to last for the shorter time, and the onset is going to be very fast. They trigger the response very fast. And the half-life is short. But then you're going to have the lipid-soluble one, you're going to have the thyroid, for example. then these type of the hormones, they're gonna have a long half-life. That means they're gonna last for longer time. Then onset of the activity or response is going to be slower. They have enough time to penetrate to the cytoplasm, goes over the DNA, resulted in gene expression. Then basically it's going to take time. Then the lipid-soluble hormones are the long half-life, long duration one. This table is going over the differences between the lipid-soluble and water-soluble hormones. As you can see, it's going to give you a little bit of the examples like steroid hormones, which they are lipid-soluble, or you're going to have water-based, all amino acid one except the thyroid, because thyroid considered as a fat-soluble one. And the sources which you can have for production of these hormones, like adrenal glands, or you can have thyroid glands, and for the water-based, all other organs such as pancreas and vesicles, which is gonna store the water solubles, and then the type of the action, the lipid solubles, they're gonna bind to the plasma proteins, and water solubles, they are free in our plasma. And the half-life, which when you're going to have water solubles is short, when you're going to have the lipid soluble is long. Mechanism of action, the water solubles, they're going to use second messenger, and the lipid solubles, they penetrate directly, diffuse to the plasma membrane and goes through the nucleus membrane and bind to the DNA. Now, we can have several hormones which they're gonna work on the same target cell or same target tissue at the same times. We can have the permissiveness. That means hormone cannot exert its effect without the presence of the other hormone. Like reproductive hormone, they require to have enough thyroid hormone in blood plasma to be activated. Sometimes we're going to have synergism. That means one hormone is going to produce more effect in the presence of another hormone. Then basically, if 1 + 1 is 2, in this case, you're going to have 3 and more effect in response. Epinephrine, in the presence of the glucagon, is going to work better. And we consider that as a synergism. Sometimes we're going to have opposite effect of two hormones, like insulin, which is going to bring basically our blood glucose high, or glucagon, which is going to store the glucose and convert it to the glycogen stored in the liver. They have two opposite effects. Now, from now, we're going to start to go over the communication between hypothalamus, pituitary gland, and release of a bunch of the endocrine hormones, which we call that hypothalamus pituitary axis. The hypothalamus is connected to the pituitary gland by infundibulum. It's a stalk that is going to connect our hypothalamus to the pituitary gland. It's a port. Our pituitary gland is going to secrete 8 major hormones, and we're going to have 2 hormones which is going to be released by posterior part. Then anterior part is going to release major hormones. The posterior part is going to basically affect on secretion of the neural hormones. Now we're going to go over those in details. First of all, inside our hypothalamus, we're going to have a specific region, which we call them paraventricular nuclei, or supraoptic nuclei. These are located inside hypothalamus, but they're going to be activated they're going to release or secrete the neurohormones, such as oxytocin or ADH, or hormones which that can affect basically on the water inside our body. Now, these hormones are released and stored in axon terminals, and they're gonna affect on the posterior part of our pituitary glands. Now, look at on this picture. You're gonna see the paraventricular nuclei region, and you're gonna see the supraoptic nucleus. And as you can see, they're gonna secrete the hormones. They can secrete the oxytocin or the antidiuretic hormones, and those hormones are going to transfer or transmit by infundibulum. Fundibulum is going to take those to the posterior part of the pituitary glands. Now, that is happening because of the action potential. Action potential is responsible for communication between neurons. And this communication is going to result in release of the hormones from axon terminal to the posterior lobe of the pituitary glands. Now, if we want to go over those communications, we're going to have a bunch of the portal system, which they're going to receive these hormones, they're going to transport them, and they're going to distribute them. The word of plexus in anatomy and physiology means the network. Then we're going to have primary capillary plexus. These are directly receive hormones from the hypothalamus. If you're looking at this picture, you're going to see the primary plexus, which mostly located around infundibulum area. And then we're going to have the hypophyseal portal vein. The hypophyseal portal vein is going to transfer those hormones to the posterior or interior part of our pituitary gland. And the secondary plexus, you're going to have those network of the blood vessels over the interior part of our pituitary gland or posterior part of our pituitary gland. Now, the posterior part is going to release oxytocin and antidiuretic hormones. Both these two hormones are made of the amino acids, 9 amino acids, but the type of the amino acids are different, and that makes the difference between the hormones. The oxytocin one basically is responsible for contraction and during the childbirth, and trigger the milk production after the birth by using the positive feedback. Then this type of the hormones, they're going to use of the PIP2, the calcium messenger one. The antidiuretic hormones, then basically is going to affect on the absorption of the water from our kidney, and that is going to be triggered by hypothalamus, and that is going to control the blood pressure, the volume of our blood, and the rest of the activity that we're going to explain it in future in details. One thing that you need to know, using of the alcohol is going to block the activity of the antidiuretic hormone. And that is going to change basically the blood vessel structure and cause vasoconstriction, which basically that means decrease in the size of our blood vessels. This picture is going over all those structures, and you can see the summary of whatever we explained during the previous slide. Now, another hormone that we can go over it is going to be growth hormone. Also, we call that somatotropin. This hormone is going to be released by the type of the cells which having same name, and basically it's going to affect on growth. Then that can affect on growth of our bone, growth of our cells, or growth of the different type of the protein that we're going to have inside our body. In addition to that, that can affect on the uptake of the glucose inside our cells. Then basically they are having the opposite effect compared to the insulin. And they can affect on the liver. Liver is responsible for conversion of the glycogen to the glucose. Then these are affecting on this process. And they're going to affect on level of the fatty acid that we have inside our cells, which we can use them sometimes for production of the energy for the cells. Then growth factor also is going to affect on the functioning of our bone structures, on the skeletal muscles, and they can affect on the protein synthesis, all those functioning that we have. Then basically growth factor is going to have direct and indirect action on the growth part. Regulation of the growth factors is being done by hypothalamic activity. Then we can have growth releasing hormone inside hypothalamus, which is going to stimulate release of growth hormone, or we can have growth hormone inhibiting hormone, or GHIH, or somatostatin, which is going to block the releasing of these hormones. And in addition to that, we should remember we can have the ghrelin, which is a hunger hormone, which is responsible also for a stimulation of release of the growth hormone inside our body. If you're looking at this picture, you're going to see the hypothalamus region, which is going to release those growth releasing hormone or inhibitory one, and that can affect on our pituitary gland. The interior part is going to target our liver, and growth hormone is going to be released in here, and they can affect on bone structure directly or indirectly. They can affect on the cell functioning, uptake of glucose. Now, growth hormone can affect on the growth of the people in size. In children, we can have the gigantism. That means the person is gonna grow in height more than 8 feet. If that happenings or the release of the growth hormone increase after the puberty, basically that can cause acromegaly, which the bone are going to be broader and bigger, especially in the hand, feet, and face. We're going to have overgrowth of those bones. Or if we're going to have less amount of that, we can have the dwarfism, which is going to affect on the height, and people basically, they just grow to the foot, the 4 feet. They're not going to have the normal size. This picture is going over all those disorders, but another things that we can add to that, thyroid is have also effect on the growth development. And you can see the picture of the normal person versus a person with gigantism or dwarfism. This graph is going over regulation of the thyroid hormone secretion. As you can see, hypothalamus is going to release thyroid releasing hormone or TRH. Thyroid releasing hormone is going to affect on the anterior pituitary gland. Anterior pituitary gland is going to release thyroid stimulating hormones or TSH. Thyroid stimulating hormones are going to affect on thyroid glands. In response to that, we're going to have the thyroid hormones like T3 and T4, which they're going to affect on their own target cells. Adrenocorticotropic hormone, or ASTH, sometimes we call that corticotropin, is a precursor for a specific type of the hormones. These hormones, which we have it mostly at the highest level in the morning, is going to affect on the several factors inside our body that's going to be released in response to the inflammation, in response to the fever, or any sort of the stress, and that is going to trigger other type of the proteins inside our body. Gonadotropin is going to be the follicle stimulating hormone or luteinizing hormone, FSH or LH. And basically, they're going to produce in the gonads in response to the gonadotropin from the anterior pituitary glands. And they're going to produce the hormones. FSH is going to affect on the production of the eggs and sperms. LH is going to affect on the ovulation in females and production or releasing of estrogen, progesterone in females, and also production of testosterone in male. Remember, all those are going to be controlled by negative feedback. Prolactin is another hormone which is going to be released by anterior pituitary gland, is going to target the production of the milk in female. In male, the role of these hormones is not clear yet. And it's going to also controlled by the neurotransmitter dopamine. And we have the hormone which we call that prolactin inhibitory hormones, which is going to block or prevent releasing of the prolactin. Prolactin is going to increase the estrogen level, stimulate prolactin, and also is going to affect on the cycles of the female. Now, we can have the hypersecretion of the prolactin. The hypersecretion of the prolactin is going to result in abnormality of the pituitary gland that can cause tumor inside anterior pituitary gland. And in female is going to give them more male structures. They're going to have facial hair, or is going to affect on the lactation and different type of the symptoms. These tables that you see is the summary of all those type of the hormones that we're going to have. And for example, the effects of the hormones, like you can see the thyroid hormones in the first top, which they're going to be stimulated by thyroid releasing hormones. In response to that, we're going to have the release of the thyroid. We can have the hypothyroidism when we're going to have higher level of the thyroid, or hypo when you're going to have the lower. We can have the ASTH, which is going to stimulate the hormones, the corticosteroid hormones in the cortex of the adrenal gland, then we can have Cushing disease when we're going to have those in the upper level. We can have follicle stimulating hormone, which is going to target ovaries or testes. If we don't have enough of that, we're going to have the lack of the menstruation, or when you're going to have higher amount of that is not affecting that much. Luteinizing hormones is similar to the FSH, and we're going to have prolactin, which you're going to see, then you're going to have high level of that can result in tumors in pituitary gland. That was the whole part A of the endocrine system. I hope you can understand what's going on, what is the type of the hormones, how they're going to secrete, and what is the target cells for each one of those hormones.